Hello Braille class, today we're going to start writing a diary entry recounting the Great Fire of London. We're going to imagine that we're a child from the Great Fire of London expressing and describing what it was like when the fire started and was going on. So in the previous lesson you were having a look at the five senses and what you as a character would feel, would see, would hear, would smell, would taste during the Great Fire of London. You're going to be using those in your diary entry today. So our learning objective today is to learn to write to recount. Okay, a diary entry is a type of recount. Our skills, we're going to be able to write in past tense, we're going to be able to write in chronological order, and we're going to be able to describe our emotions and feelings. Remember, we're going to pretend that we're a child from the Great Fire of London recounting what's happening. So what features need to be included when writing a diary? Well, you had a look at this last lesson. So we need to start Dear Diary. It needs to include questions, rhetorical questions. It needs to be written in chronological order. It needs to include time connectives first, then after that. It needs to have a lot of description in it to explain exactly what it was like. So if you picked it up in 10 years' time, you could have that image in your mind of exactly what was happening. It needs to use pronouns. You're going to be talking in first person, so I. And it needs to include those feelings, those emotions, and that close at the end with your name. So, why when writing a diary do we need to write in past tense? I want you to have a little think. Why would we be writing in past tense when we're writing our diary? Well, because we're recounting something that has already happened. Okay, we're not writing in present tense, we're writing in past tense. This morning I did this, I ate this, then I went to see my friend, all in past tense. So I went downstairs, went. That verb of go is the present tense and went is the past tense. So it's not going to be I am going down the stairs. It's going to be I went downstairs. I felt scared, not I feel scared. So feel is present, felt is past. So we know that diary entries usually start, they've got the date, it can either be on this side or the other side, and it starts Dear Diary. And usually the person writing the diary will say what the day's been like. So today's been super. I'm having a great time on holiday. So we're going to do that for our diary entry. Okay, so we're going to say it's Sunday the 2nd of September 1666. That's the day the fire started. Dear Diary. So we need to say what the day is going to be like. Now remember, on this day, the fire started. It started in Thomas Farriner's bakery and it started to spread. So you've got to say what sort of day that it was. So remember, we are writing as a child during this first day of the Great Fire of London. Imagine your house, your home, all your belongings are at threat from this fire. So is it going to be an amazing day? Probably not. It's probably going to be the worst day of your life so far because you're having to leave everything behind. The fear of the fire is coming. People are screaming, crying because the fire is spreading all over London. You don't know where you're going to live. You don't know whether the fire is going to get to your house. You don't know what you can take with you. And it's very frantic and stressful. So you need to think about what type of day you're having. So for mine, we might say, what a terrible day I've had. What an awful day I've had. What a frightening day I've had. So I've created in mind, Dear Diary, what a terrible day this has been. Do you want to know what happened? So I've used an exclamation sentence here. Remember, exclamation sentences start with what or how. So what an awful day this has been. What a horrific day this has been. Dear Diary, this has been the worst day of my life so far. Yes, that wouldn't be an exclamation sentence because it doesn't start with what or how, but you could put that exclamation mark at the end to emphasise. Do you want to know what happened? So on your first part of your diary that you can actually start writing now in your purple book, you need to put at the top Sunday the 2nd of September 1666. You need to leave a space underneath. Dear Diary with D and D at the beginning of Dear and Diary capitalised. Dear because it's the beginning of that sentence and Diary because it's the name. With what piece of punctuation after it? A comma. And then you want underneath your sentence about what type of day it was. What a horrific day this has been. Dear diary, this has been the worst day of my life! Exclamation mark. Do you want to know all the horrific things that happened? Do you want to find out more? Do you want to know what happened? So I want you to pause the video now and I want you to have a go at writing that section up. But you cannot copy mine. So I don't want what a terrible day. Give me another adjective. Horrific, horrible, disastrous. Okay, so see whether you can pause the video and start writing this section up in your purple book for me. And then we're going to move on to the next part. So we're just introducing here to our diary what the day's been like and does the diary want to find out more. So hopefully you've had time to pause the video and write that first section because we're doing it in chunks today. The next part that we need to include in our diary entry, we need to think about what people back in the 1600s might have been doing before that fire started. Now we know that the fire started in the early hours of the morning when most people were asleep. So we need to think about in chronological order, what was our character doing at the time? What woke them up? Okay, what alerted them to the fact that this fire was happening? So were they sleeping? Were they making the bed? Had they gotten up to go to the toilet using the privy or the bucket that they might have in their house? Whether they're rich, they would have had their own privy, or whether they're poor, having their bucket. Okay, so was it the smell of smoke that woke them up? Was it people screaming outside their window? Ah, fire, fire! Was it shouting? Was it actually their mum or their dad or their sibling, their sister or their brother waking them up saying, something's going on outside, there's a fire, I can hear people screaming? Okay, so you need to decide, is it going to be that the house that you're living in is starting to become on fire and you can smell the smoke? Okay, maybe you had your window open so smoke from the street was coming in. Was it people screaming outside, fire, fire, run for your lives? Was it people shouting that you could hear? Or was it your sibling or your mum and dad that came and woke you up and said, quick, we need to get ready. There's a fire and it's spreading. So, as you can see, I have started this next line underneath, okay? This is the next part. And if you want to, you could leave a line as well, okay? I've just showed it on here in a different colour for you. So if you wanted to, you could leave a line like a new paragraph. So I have started mine. I was sleeping sweetly in my bed when I was rudely awakened by people shouting and screaming outside my bedroom window. So I've tried to use the language that they would have used back then. So I've said rudely awakened. So you need to say in this part, so you can see it's 2 sentences long, what you were doing, how you were awakened, so you can steal my word. Okay, how you were woken up, how you were awakened. In this section. So I was sleeping sweetly in my bed when. So I've used the conjunction when. I was rudely awakened by people shouting and screaming outside my bedroom window. I thought that I was dreaming, but I wasn't. So I want you to think about what you were doing as your character. Was it that you were going to the toilet when you heard people screaming fire, fire outside? Was it that actually you were rudely awakened, just like me, by your brother or your sister saying, listen, listen, something's going on outside, there's a fire, we need to wake mum and dad up? Okay, but I really want you to use that conjunction when in this section. So I was sleeping peacefully, or I was sleeping beautifully in my bed when I was rudely awakened by my horrible brother shouting in my ear saying, there's a fire, there's a fire. I thought that I might be dreaming, but I wasn't. Okay, so see whether you can edit that section. What were you doing? Were you going to the toilet when you could smell smoke? Were you sleeping? Were you dreaming? Was it your brother or sister that woke you up? Was it your mum or dad that woke you up? Was it people screaming outside? Was it the smell of fire or the spitting noise of the flames outside? So see whether you can adapt my version here. Pause the video now so you can see it, and then you can change parts of it. Okay, and you've got to use that conjunction when. So I was quickly going to the toilet using my bucket when I heard the shouting and screaming of people outside. Fire, fire, I heard. I thought that I was in a daze, but I wasn't. So see whether you can adapt that paragraph. So pause that video now and see whether you can do that for me. So hopefully you've had time to write out that section, adapting mine. Okay, now we're going to think about if you heard those noises, if you saw the smoke, if you saw that fire, what might you do? So maybe in your house, you're the child that's woken up, that's been awakened by the shouting, by the noises. Mum and dad aren't up yet. Brother or sister next to you are sleeping all the way through, just like my dog would, because he's a very deep sleeper, or my partner would. Okay, what are you going to do? You hear those noises. You found out it's not a dream. People are shouting outside, fire, fire. Maybe you've looked out the window and you can see them. You can see the sparks. You can see the flames and the houses across the street. Okay, what are you going to do? So I've heard the noises, and what I've actually done is I've changed my part from before. So here I thought that I was dreaming, but I wasn't. So what I've put in there is a subordinate clause. So I thought that I was dreaming, so I looked outside my window. That's what I did. I heard the screams. I thought, what is going on? Wake myself up. I might slap my face. I might pour water on my face. I go outside the window to see where the screams are coming from, what's going on outside. Okay, so I've added in that subordinate clause in pink, so you can see here. So I looked outside my window, comma, but I wasn't. Then I'm saying what was going on. I'm describing what happened. So people were running with their possessions through the streets, screaming, fire, fire. Okay, at the beginning of that speech, you can see I've got a speech mark. I've got a capital letter for my first word. That's really important. At the beginning of speech, you always have a capital letter. And because I've said fire twice, I've got that comma in between, the exclamation mark before the end speech mark. There's always a piece of punctuation, whether it's a comma if the speech is in between the sentence and it's not the end of the sentence. For example, like Tom shouted, stop that, at his friend. So you'd have a comma, a speech mark after that, and then to his friend would be the end part of the sentence with a full stop on the end. You could have a full stop on the end if it's the end of that sentence and the speech is at the end. And we've got an exclamation mark here, but it always goes before the end speech mark. So I've added on here, I heard the screams, I went to the window to look outside. What did I see? I've described that. Maybe you saw people running and falling over in the street. Maybe you saw the fire and the flames, okay? So I want you to see now whether you can tell me that you looked outside the window, okay, to double check what was going on, okay, if it was smoke. Did you put your top or your 90 over your nose, okay, to stop it going up into your nostrils? And did you look outside the window, or did you go to see where the smoke was coming from? Okay, so see whether you can add onto this section. So pause the video, okay, and I want you to see whether you can add on. So if you don't want to put that subordinate clause in, okay, because you've already put, I thought that I was dreaming, but I wasn't, you might add, I looked outside the window, or I ran to my bedroom window and I saw people running with their possessions through the streets, screaming and crying, fire, fire. So I've actually just changed this section to get rid of that subordinating conjunction, just in case some of you don't want to add that in before the but I wasn't. So I've put, I quickly ran to my bedroom window to see what was going on, and I saw people running with their possessions through the streets, screaming fire, fire. So see whether you can pause the video, write at this section, what did you do when you heard the noise or smelt the smoke or heard the flames? Okay, did you go to your bedroom window? Did you put your 90 over your nose to stop the smoke bellowing in? Okay, where did you go? What did you do? And what could you see? Describe to me. Could you see thick black smoke all throughout the air? Okay, did it get into your eyes, on your clothes, so they stunk? Okay, was it people screaming and crying? Was it the flickering of flames against the window? Okay, so see whether you can pause the video and write at that section. Remember, you can just adapt mine. Okay, I ran as fast as I could to my bedroom window to have a look at what was going on. And to my dismay, I saw people running through the streets, crying and screaming, fire, fire, get to safety. I hope you enjoyed our diary entry lesson today and starting our diary. We're going to do a bit more tomorrow. So what I want you to do now is just double check and go back through your work. Make sure you've got capital letters at the beginning of sentences, full stops at the end. If you've used a question, you need a question mark. If you've used an exclamation sentence, you need an exclamation. If you've used repetition like really, 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 put a comma in between the first two reallys, okay? So thinking about your punctuation and then your handwriting. Is that the best handwriting you can do? Are your letters sat on the line?